Everyone wants to prevent Tommy John surgery. In this episode, you'll get 7 exercises that will do just that. But first, you'll learn why pitchers are either starters or closers and really can't be both. Finally, we'll explain why you should never use a radar gun in the bullpen. Here we go. Thank you for downloading Season 5, Episode 8 of Baseball Pitching the Fix, the podcast that keeps pitchers healthy and reaching their peak performance. I am your host, Joe Janish, and with me, as always, is baseball pitching motion expert Angel Borrelli. And Angel, how are things on the West Coast today?
Things are sunny and beautiful. Everything's great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastically. We are toward the end of July in 2018, and there's all kinds of fun stuff happening. Summer ball is in full swing. We just had fun with the All-Star game, and we're going to jump right into the meat and potatoes of this episode. I want to start out with our lessons from MLB. And Angel, I was just reading about a pitcher for the Arizona Diamondbacks, Shelby Miller, who's coming off of Tommy John surgery that he had. And he's still having some issues with his elbow this year. He started a few games. He's a starting pitcher. He started a few games, did not do very well. They're putting him back on the disabled list to kind of just get his arm back in shape. I think he's about maybe 18 months out. And they said if he does come back this season, that they will use him in a bullpen role, not as a starter. They'll bring him back and just use him as a reliever because that will be less stress on his arm. And I was thinking about that, and I know I've heard this before. In fact, there was a comment by John Smoltz, Hall of Famer pitcher John Smoltz, who, when he was asked, because he was both a reliever, a very successful reliever, and a very successful starter, and he said that relieving was much more taxing on the arm, and he found it a lot more difficult than starting. And I was thinking about that, and I thought that's very strange, because originally when John Smoltz had his first Tommy John surgery, they brought him back specifically as a closer to take a lot of stress off of his arm. And the same thing was done with Jonathan Papelbon, who was at the beginning of his career, he was a really good starting pitcher, and they were going to put him in as a starter. And then they said, you know what, we want to save his arm and make sure he's safe. And so they made him a reliever, and that's how he became a closer. And a lot of other pitchers have made the transition with the idea that it would somehow keep their arm healthy, but yet Smoltz said that being a reliever is more taxing on the arm. So I said, well, you know what, this might be an interesting subject to bring up with Angel because she knows about these things. So Angel, what do you think about this whole idea of a pitcher on rehab, a starting pitcher on rehab, coming back as a reliever, as I guess as part of his rehab until his arm is ready? Or is that not a good idea because relieving is more stressful on the arm?
Well, I love this topic because, I think one job coaches have, especially youth coaches and high school coaches, is when they're working with pitchers and they have pitchers on their staff to really understand the difference in closing and to understand the difference in starting, and also to understand some of the things they may not be thinking about when they take a starter and they put him in to close a game on a night when, it's not an issue of he's not pitching the next day or whatever, but when they switch the roles, or for any coaches or kids who think that it's okay to switch the roles. I think there's a lot of things that you have to consider, and it's always the decisions you make when you don't have all the facts that are the dangerous ones. So as long as you know everything that's going on and you know the price that you might pay and you understand it, I think that these role switches and these ideas of using a guy more than one way, or even this concept that he's going to use his arm less, I think there's a lot to be said about it. And I'm very happy to be addressing the topic. And what I did when you mentioned that we would be talking about this is I called 2 of my pitchers, that one is a starter and had to close, and then one who was a starter is now a closer and now finds out that he is a closer. So the first thing I want to say, to just get a general concept here, is that pitchers that are starters and pitchers that are closers are very different. They're different mentally, and they're different usually physiologically, but they're definitely different in the way they approach their skill. So I think our job is to always try to put the pitcher in the best role. The young kids don't always know where they're the best, but coaches usually have an instinct because they'll just kind of notice certain characteristics. So let's talk first about the exact issue you brought up, and then I want to extrapolate it into maybe giving some instructions and some things that people can think about and consider when you either have a son or you have a pitcher on your staff, or if you're someone who frequently mixes the roles because, let's say, you have to win a game. So, okay, so first of all, I agree with Smoltz. I agree that it's a different kind of thing on the arm, which is what I think he was saying. And what was really interesting to me is the first pitcher I called was, of course, my client Joe, who's with the A's now. And when he was in school in his last year, they were putting him in as a closer. And they always respected his arm, meaning if he closed one night, they wouldn't put him in the next day. But they were pushing starts because they needed him as a closer. And that coach made some great decisions regarding that and always discussed it with Joe first. But I said to him, because he's definitely a starter, he had the most interesting answer to me. I said, Joe, I said, when Smoltz has said that it's tougher on your arm, and I said, do you think that? And by the way, when he was brought in as a closer, he was doing a 1, 2, 3 to the side. I mean, he was great as the closer. And I said, was it harder on your arm? Did it affect your start that you made in 2 days? What can you say? And he said, well, he said, what's hard about it is you have to, quote unquote, get hot every day. And I said, what do you mean? Because I'm expecting to hear him say something about the fatigue in the arm. He said, listen, he says, first of all, if someone's going to switch back and forth, they have to train as hard as we do. And I said, what do you mean we? He says, the workouts you've been giving me my whole life. He said, I train harder than any other pitcher. And he does. I don't baby my pitchers at all. They train with real exercises. I'm an old school strength coach, huge, big arms, big back. Their elbows are well and their shoulders are well protected. He says, if I didn't train this hard, I couldn't have done it. He said, so you have to train hard. He says, but getting hot every day where you think you might go in, so then you're on the mound and you're getting hot. And so when he said that, I went, wow. And actually the truth is because he's a starter, and he gets quote unquote hot at probably a different time of the game because he's got 7 innings to go. And he always went 7 innings, sometimes complete games, many times complete games. Their temperature, and I'm speaking about temperature abstractly and probably also physiologically, has a different way it builds. It's also a different way they modulate it. So I thought it was interesting that he said that. Now, when I talk to my other pitcher, DJ Shirabi, who pitches in an independent league called the Sonoma Stompers, he's somebody that is not trained with me, but he's trained with me on his mechanics. He lives far away, and we worked years to get him to where he's at now. And his answer to me was that the difference in starting and closing is huge. He said, and he was always a starter. When I said, I'm shocked to hear you're a closer, but I believe it because he's got filthy stuff and he's very powerful. And he's powerful powerful out of the gate. So it kind of made sense. And he said, as a starter, he said, I couldn't maintain what I was doing. He said, by the 4th or 5th inning, I was getting sloppy, missing my spots, and he was injured all the time, it seemed, from what he would call overuse, doing crazy things in the gym, which I had no control over. I wasn't working with him on his strength programs. But he said, no, he says, I couldn't maintain it. But when I got to being a closer, he said, that's when I started understanding that I actually was a closer. And I said, well, what do you think about your arm being used all the time? He says, when you're a closer, and you're on the mound getting ready and you're not sure you're going in, you kind of start to get this sixth sense of you're watching the game. You kind of can know. You don't come out of the gate right away, pitch number one. You know how to kind of modulate it. You know when to pour it on in the pen, when to turn it up, and then you just learn how to be exactly right at the moment you're supposed to be right. Well, so here we've got two different pitchers saying two different things, but they're coming from different. One is absolutely a closer who, through contrast, found out that that's what he is, and it makes sense when I think about who he is. And then you've got Joe who's done both. And so I think the differences right there are so important. So for example, to use as rehab, putting someone in as a closer, here's what the coach is thinking. And this is how you can think correctly, but there's more things to think about. Blind spots are the things that we all have to try to eliminate. The shadow can only get you from behind. If there's something you don't understand or know, that's the thing that can be dangerous. So here's a coach probably thinking, oh, he only has to go in for one inning. So this is going to be great. Less work. Well, if he's actually a starter, and he was a starter, correct, Joe?
Correct.
Okay. If he was actually a starter and now you need him to get ready for an inning, and he doesn't have, for example, that skill yet that DJ talked about, which is, you get in there and you kind of figure out if you're going in and where are you at and when are you going to turn it on. He knows he's got to bring something that usually he had time to get to. So now you've got a guy who isn't really experienced on managing his physiology and understanding his physiology in that situation. I'm not speaking about that he's not an experienced pitcher. I'm not talking about that he has any lack of knowledge about what it's going to take to get out there and how to pitch. But I'm talking about the things that physiologically he's different than the guy who is, used to doing that. So in that case, Smoltz is 100% correct. It's not only that you have to get, quote unquote, like Joe said, hot maybe more frequently, but you're asking a guy who really hasn't had experience doing it. So I think that if you're going to be in a situation like that, this is a guy who, if you're using him as a closer, it can't be oh, you're going in. It's got to be, you're definitely going in or you're not going in. You've got to have plenty of time for him to warm up. He's got to have time to get acclimated to that situation. And also, I think the discussion with the pitcher is definitely an important one, but it isn't necessarily the right thing to do and just do it without any awareness that, yes, this is going to not be an easy thing for him. It's going to be more difficult. And here's the other thing I always say. If you're in a situation with a pitcher where you're starting to feel you've got to be careful with him and you're starting to think of ways to, quote unquote, handle him because you're kind of worried, well, then he's not ready to return to play. Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah. So with that being said, the differences are important. Now, what can we take home from this? And what do I want all of you coaches to know? First of all, I think it is our responsibility as coaches that when we see a kid, and I know you baseball coaches do this all the time, you'll see a kid who's pitching and then he'll one day he'll be doing something else and you'll go, whoa, he's really good at that. And then when you question the kid, you find out he kind of likes the other thing better. So maybe you've got a pitcher who's really a better shortstop, or you've got a first baseman who's really a better third baseman. You coaches are doing this all the time. Whenever I have a pitcher who comes to me, I ask him if he's a starter or a closer. If he says I've been doing both, then I ask him, which do you love the most? They never hesitate, even when they're younger. Now, I deal mostly with, high school level and college, but frequently they're used in different roles. And when I hear a pitcher who's used in different roles, I'm usually thinking that the coach is trying to find a role for him because he's not actually pulling it off as a starter. Or the team has got such a situation going on that he's the only good pitcher, and so they're trying to use him as a closer. So in the first situation, the coach is probably doing a good thing, trying to figure out where he fits best because of his performance. And in the second scenario, if you're using your best pitcher as a closer because you have a lack of depth in pitching, and also you've got to get the W, so you got to put the guy in who can do it. You've got to be aware of some things. So, and Joe, you know what I'm talking about, right? Just kind of like using the best arm on the team.
Yeah, of course. Of course. I mean,
Yeah.
that's typical. Your best pitcher is going to be your number one starter, and then you may use him as a closer,
Yes.
if he's rested and he can do it. I mean, you want your best
Yes.
guy out there every possible time.
Yes, and of course these things come up in baseball, and there should never be that, oh, you can't do this. What I think we should want to expect is our pitchers are healthy enough. It's just like Joe said, he's so healthy that it didn't affect him at all, not at all. But he said it's the way I train.
Right.
He knows, but if you don't train that way. So yes, I think you have to be ready. But when you're using something consistently as a practice, you want to be careful of it. So here's an interesting story. So somebody's flying out to work with me, but this is a kid who's a great pitcher. I've seen his video, and he has an unusual elbow injury. And in talking to the father, he said kind of nonchalantly, he's actually a starter, but they've been using him as a closer. So I know he's not getting overused, but the doctor said this is an overuse injury. And I saw the MRI report, and I'm like, something's weird about this. So in further talking to the father, he said, no, he's been used as a closer, so he's hardly pitching. He calls me up 2 days later and says, Angel, he said, I feel so stupid. And I said, what do you mean? He says, you're 100% right about, I said, something's not making sense here when he's telling me when he pitched. He said, he was being used as a closer, but he was warming up every day. They thought they were putting him in.
Right.
And then they didn't. So think about what Joe said. You've got to get hot every day, meaning the way Joe's talking about it is you got to push yourself to bring out your highest intensity. Okay. The way DJ talked about it, because he's more of a closer, he knew how to modulate and when to bring it up, but that's what he does. Okay. So there's that difference in experience. Now you've got the guy who is a starter. They're using him as a closer. And now he's probably somewhere in the middle of both of those comments by those two pitchers. And now but he's warming up every day because he didn't know when he was going in. Think about the volume on the arm. Think about the quote unquote hotness that he may had to feel, or his lack of ability to get there. So then him overthrowing to get there. In other words, maybe the fourth day he's warming up, he's fatigued. So now he's going to try harder. And nothing's worse than when a pitcher realizes he doesn't have it, and then he makes himself have it. Because what he does is he ends up using his limbs more than he uses, meaning his arm, more than he really uses his body. So the danger in the thing you want to be aware of, the blind spot I want you coaches not to have, is be aware of these pitfalls. Like, okay, we're putting him in, but has he warmed up 3 days in a row to go in? I mean, you can't help in baseball always knowing when someone's going to go in, but ask yourself those questions, especially if you start seeing a pitcher having performance issues. Think about, gee, have I been using him? Okay, he hasn't gone in a game, but how many times has he done a pen to warm up because he thought he was going in? These are little tiny details that are important. And the other thing is that it should be rare that you switch roles, but here's the direction that is the safest one. A starter can probably pull it off being a closer if you give him that time to quote unquote get hot. And he, of course, is good enough to know how to get to that place. But the closer being put in as a starter is probably where you're going to be running not just a performance risk, but a risk of it being him probably not being able to go the distance. Now, if you want to use 5 closers in one game, that makes sense. But you've got to have this discussion with the guys, but you got to try to understand that when we're talking about positions that are closing and starting, we're not just talking about the amount of courage a guy has, like, oh yeah, I don't care if the bases are loaded and you bring me in. That kid's different from the one who says, no, I'd rather have control and not get the bases loaded. So we know there's a personality difference. But remember, there's really also a physiology difference, and more so, there's a chemical difference on the way that they modulate their chemistry. And the analogy that I can give to have you understand chemistry is we all know people in our lives, or we've seen people who we would call, boy, if you say anything, they flare up in a second. And then you'll know people who, boy, nothing gets under his skin. I could be having an argument and he almost calms down. What you're seeing on the person who flips out right away and cannot control that as much as they want to, and the person who doesn't flip out, who almost gets calm in the face of that kind of chaos, that's a chemistry difference. And the chemistry is affecting the brain, and the one guy blows and the one guy doesn't. So the differences in starters and closers have that kind of chemistry difference, the way they manage and the way they are stimulated. And that's why it was interesting when Joe used the word hot, his exact words, and when DJ was talking about it in a different way. It was a beautiful example of the differences. So coaches know that they're different and help them discover who they are. The pitcher that I want to always understand the most is the one who doesn't know what he is. And that's usually because he hasn't found success in either way. But I can work with someone and tell right away. But the guy who seems to consistently lose it in the third and fourth and fifth inning, you're probably looking at someone who is maybe not a bad pitcher. He's just in the wrong situation. So anyway, what a great situation you brought up, Joe. I love it. Do you have any questions on it?
No, yeah, I do actually. But it's interesting. I think that was John Smoltz's issue when he went to become a closer, was that to him, the taxing issue was exactly what Joe said, which was having to get up in the bullpen, warm up, get down, warm up, get down, warm up, get down, and then you're in the game, or you're not in the game, or you just warmed up and you threw 60 pitches in the bullpen, and now you got to try again tomorrow. I think that was part of what he was talking about. What I do wonder about too, though, is there's a term called a swingman in Major League Baseball, where there are these pitchers who kind of vacillate between both roles, starting and relieving. And I imagine that they must have the most difficult role of all, because one day you're a starter, and then you're in the bullpen 4 days later instead of as a starter, and then you go back and forth. These are guys. There are probably maybe a handful or a dozen of these guys around MLB that do this, that swing between both roles. And I have to wonder if it even makes sense to have a pitcher do that, if they're really more suited to one or the other.
Well, there's something missing. I mean, think of sports. We don't have the quarterback be a wide receiver one day. I mean, sometimes on the line, there may be some little variations where a kid's trying to discover something where he's better. But basically in sports, you pretty much, well, here's what you want to do in sports. In sports, you want to become good at something. And if in sports, every position especially on a team, is an important one. And if you're having to practice more than one position, something is suffering. Whether or not the kid is good at both, there is still something that's suffering, especially if it's involving a pitcher and another position. He will never see his top level as a pitcher if he's also using his arm, let's say in the outfield. It's why really good coaches know to put the pitcher at first base, in high school when they need to put him somewhere. But when you've got a pitcher who is almost laissez-faire about it, he himself doesn't know, so he's not saying, hey, this is what I am when he gets to the team, or if the team is shifting him. I mean, I would be, if somebody told me that, I would be interested in what the pitcher's feedback was. if a pitcher is keeping his job because he's able to do that, and maybe he's not number one in the pen, he's not a number one starter when he starts. That's a different thing, but it's sort of like a lack of identity or maybe a lack of skill. Can a pitcher be absolutely stellar at both? I do not think so.
Yeah.
I do not think so. I think a good starter could be good at closing when he can be good at closing when you need him because he's a gamer and he knows how to do it. But if it was a regular practice of, oh, we don't know if he's a starter or a closer, something is amiss either in the evaluation of him or in what the pitcher's doing as a performance. So there's something about that got some gray area to it that would require verbal investigation and also looking at performance. So, yeah, I would go out on a limb and say that there's something amiss with that kind of thing. I didn't even know that term, swingman, Joe.
Yeah. See, you learn something new every day. See, I'm teaching
I
you.
do. I can't believe it. I know. I love it.
Well, well, to your point, I almost universally the swingmen are generally mediocre at starting and mediocre at relieving. They generally are not used as closers. They'll probably be at best a seventh inning setup man, but generally these are pitchers who probably aren't quite good enough to be one of the five starters. Definitely not good enough to be the closer. So they're kind of like, in that middle ground where they don't know what their role is because they're not really, they might be used as like a long relief guy. If there's somebody gets into trouble in the second inning, they need somebody who has length to come in and pitch the third, fourth, fifth, and kind of like get to the end of the game. So in most cases, the swingman is generally not the best at either closing or starting. He's somewhere in the middle. So in many cases, just he's hanging on to his job and they're trying to create a role for him or try to find.
Right, exactly. They're actually helping him keep a job. Exactly. So, and by the way, not helping him become better at one. That's the thing. So it's sort of, yeah, it's got a upside and downside to it. So anyway, great issue, Joe.
Well, thank you. And so let's move right into the teaching moment. What do you have for us today?
Well, I'm kind of passionate about this next topic, so let me go into it slowly, and then I'm going to pour on the intensity because I've got a serious message for pitchers and a call to action to everyone. So, I watch a lot of baseball shows, and I don't always have the time to watch games, but I go in and out of watching a lot of games. And if I hear it one more time, in fact, I heard it through the All-Star game, and I started getting upset about it, and I started realizing that we're losing track with our pitchers. The announcers have been talking about, oh, all these great pitchers and everything, and that their main job these days seems to be staying healthy.
Right.
That their main job, they're not saying, oh, their main job is to improve their velocity or their main job is to be a better pitcher. No, they're saying that the main job of these good pitchers is to stay healthy because of the high rate of injury that's going on. And of course, I've been hearing this for forever, but it seems like right now everybody, they're saying, why with all these tools that we have, why are pitchers still getting injured and why are they having more than one surgery? And when I heard this at the All-Star game, these are great pitchers and their number one challenge is staying healthy. I'm like, there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with it. And then in the last week, I heard of two situations where pitchers I knew retired or had to leave the sport because of having multiple surgeries, becoming injured to where they couldn't play. And they actually got fed up with the whole thing. And these are pitchers that were actually really talented. So I'm thinking, what is going on here? And I know what it takes to keep a pitcher healthy. And I absolutely 100% believe that pitchers have got to start. Once again, I'm going to bring this message. They have to start taking better care of themselves and they have to take responsibility for taking better care of themselves. Now, in the last week, I've been doing research again. I'm obsessed with different body parts, and I'm obsessed now with the fingers and the wrist and the forearm, as I have been for quite some time. But I've been reading a lot of research on the forearm. And it just recommits me to the importance of pitchers getting in the gym and working like real athletes on getting their arms stronger. And when I say arm, the focus of today's teaching moment is going to be the lower arm, which is the forearm. And the forearm is not the elbow. The forearm is the forearm. It is the lower part of the arm that includes the wrist and the hands. These are the parts I want to talk about. But the deal is, these are the parts that break down. And when they break down, the UCL becomes damaged. So you can talk elbow all day, which the UCL is an elbow ligament, but you're talking about that a part of their arm, the forearm, actually broke down and became weak. And that is why the UCL was left and exposed to have to do its own job. And it can't do it that well. It needs the help of all the muscles. Now, when I started as a strength coach, I've been a strength coach my whole life, but in 1995, I had been working with just male athletes from all walks of sports, and I was really good at what I did. And, when I started lifting weights 40 years ago, I trained with nothing but men because men, the gym is their world. And I saw that right away. And of course, I was lifting weights before it was popular. So I've trained with men alongside men, and when I became a strength coach, I was better at working with men, so I trained male athletes. When I worked with my first pitcher, and this was in the 90s when pitchers didn't lift weights. I hate to say it, but I was like, God, these guys are babies. The other guys are ballers. These guys are babies. And so I said, I'm not going to have that happen. So when I had coaches listening to me, they're like, what? Our pitchers are going to lift weights? I'd say, yeah, just give me a bunch of guys. Just a volunteer program. And I was in graduate school. I started training these guys to be beasts the way I trained everyone else. I didn't know how to hold back. And, saying a pitcher couldn't go over his head with a dumbbell, when I'm seeing that the ball is over his head, it didn't make sense to me. So from day one, I was aggressive. And all the guys that I worked with, they loved it. In fact, it's why, as a female strength coach, my work has always been busy with the guys because I know how to bring it, and I expect them to bring it. So I know the importance of training hard. When I hear about all these injuries, I know there's something missing. And when I review workouts from different strength coaches in different schools of what their pitchers are doing, I see why injuries are happening. And until we know that we have turned over every stone with trying to protect pitchers, we cannot stop until we find some solution. And having a strong body is critical. And for anybody out there who lifts weights, you know that when you fall, you don't get hurt as much. You know that when you're in bad shape, you recover better. Lifting weights, being strong is critical. But the fingers, the wrist, and the forearm, I don't care if you don't train any other part of your body. We have got to get our pitchers in better shape in that part of their body. It is the number one protection for the UCL. Now, I have been preaching this for a long time. I wrote an entire book on it, even though my book is called Strength Training the Elbow. The reason why it's called that is because most people, when they think elbow, they're like, okay, they know what it is. I couldn't say strength training the radial ulnar joint. They wouldn't know what it was. But this whole book was designed to work just with the arm, including the elbow joint, meaning the biceps and triceps. I designed an entire book around it because it's so important. But in the last week, I read some research where the other side of of the sports science world, they get in the lab, they take cadavers, they cut them open, they look at things. And now they're saying, oh, wow, now we know why UCL injuries are so bad. And now we know why UCL surgeries are failing. And now we know why non-surgical UCL rehab programs are failing, because the connection of the finger and wrist muscles lays so adjacent to the part of the UCL that is so frequently damaged that the connection between the effect of having that musculature lay so close to the ligaments that is what's causing the problem, they're saying, with the success of with surgeries and the success of non-operative rehab programs. But when I read that, I extrapolate it to, and the fact that they need it in the first place. If these guys are going in and looking at the actual geography and real estate, and they're saying, oh, this is why the UCL surgery didn't work, well, then, oh, it is why you needed it in the first place. So I became even more passionate about trying to drive home that pitchers have got to start training their forearms, and it needs to be serious training. Does that make sense, Joe? I mean, how many times have you heard flexor pronator mass strain? That is the forearm. That is one of the precursor injuries to UCL tears. How many times have we talked about that on the show?
How many times have I heard that today?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it's true. You know, you talk about how, lifting weights was kind of taboo back in the old days. And Nolan Ryan was the only one who probably lifted weights, and maybe Tom Seaver a little bit. And those guys had very long careers. Major League Baseball and baseball in general finally said, oh, yeah, these pitchers need to lift weights. They need to be in the gym. And I don't think there's any question that pitchers are going to the gym and working out. But the problem is that they're not, like you said, they're not working out the right ways. They're not strengthening. I mean, in some cases they're strengthening some of the muscles they need, but they're not strengthening the most critical muscles in the elbow and the forearm and the wrist, like you're talking about. And I think that's the thing that people need to understand is that, yeah, you could spend 3 hours in the gym, but if you're just doing things that are going to make you look good at the beach, or you're going to be just focusing on squats, and I mean, there's plenty of exercises that are good, but if you still need to do the things that are going to prevent the elbow injuries, especially considering that almost all pitchers, sorry to say, almost all pitchers have a mechanical flaw that is going to exacerbate any weaknesses that they have in the forearm. So I've said it many episodes. I say it all the time. If you do not have Angel's book on strengthening the elbow, go to her website, hit pause on this podcast right now, go to gymscience.com and go get that book. It'll probably be the single most important investment that you will make all year for your entire career, because I don't know of any other guide or book or any place on the internet where you can get that kind of information. And this isn't an infomercial. This is to help you become a better pitcher and be a healthy pitcher. And I think every pitching coach, every pitcher, the parent of every serious pitcher, they should get a copy of this book, just so at the very least they can understand how much, it's how important it is to have strength in the elbow and the wrist and the fingers and the forearm and everything else. It's just a completely ignored part of the body by the pitchers, and it's one of the most crucial. And you want to know why we have so many Tommy John surgeries? Well, that's at least one of the reasons.
Yeah.
And I'm jumping off my soapbox.
No, well, listen, thanks for the publicity. And guess what, listeners? I'm going to tell you exactly how to train them, whether you buy the book or not, but you'll probably want to get the book. The book is great, but it also explains the elbow and different things about it. But whether you buy it or not, I'm going to tell you exactly what I want you to do for your fingers and forearms. So what I want everyone to do is I want you to help me with this war that I want on these injuries once and for all. I want pitchers to wake up to the fact that this isn't, the responsibility is on them. It is unfortunate that the fitness world has become a world of entertainment where I see people in the gym who should be lifting big weights. They should be training straightforward strength training, and they're doing what I call stupid things because everyone wants to be entertained. And what happens is if you get pitchers ending up training like that, then they start to miss the boat. Yes, they need to do squats. They need to train their chest, shoulders, arms, everything. And they need to have big forearms. You need big, strong forearms. You need big, strong triceps. Your arms are the thing that you do your job with, and the fingers and wrists cannot be overlooked. If a bodybuilder is trying to build every muscle, he's doing his forearms, he's doing his wrists. You can believe it because he has to have every muscle looking the same way. He doesn't like skip over certain parts. So what I want everyone to do is listening to this is share this with coaches, share this with strength coaches. For coaches out there, make your guys train their arms when you have their programs coming up. And the reason why I'm talking about this today is August is what I call a transition month. So a lot of times summer ball's ending, fall ball hasn't started yet. So guys are getting in the gym and they're getting after it. Well, I want you to get after it in the right way. And if you do nothing else in the month of August, I want you to end up at the end of August with big forearms. And the forearms are slow twitch muscle fibers. Now, the word slow has nothing to do with the speed of doing a movement, unlike what most people think who don't know physiology. But what it means is they have endurance to go all day. Well, duh, your hands are working all day. You're hanging on to things all day. Your forearms are an endurance muscle. They can handle it. They can handle it because they have to handle your life all day long. You've never had your hands hanging limp because your forearm couldn't keep the wrist together. So the type of muscle it can take a lot, and you have to train it. Now, let's talk about what's really going on when you pitch. So the muscles that these scientists that looked inside, the muscles they were most concerned about, guys, they're the muscles on your fingertips that go across your wrist up into the inside of your elbow. But guess what? They're the muscles that when you have your fingers wrapped around a ball, those are the muscles that are gripping it. And those are the muscles they go, oh, wow, they're right near the ligament and they're the ones causing a problem. So we got to think about this. And they, of course, made recommendations that are surgically oriented to surgeons. But I'm saying that is huge information that I already knew. But just to drive the point home, that we've got to get those muscles strong. So remember, you've got to deal with the fingers. And I'm talking about the tips and the three bones, the three joints you see on your fingers, and the way you grab the ball. Those are a set of muscles. So the ball, the fingers that grab onto the ball have to be dealt with. Now, those fingers are controlling and being controlled by the wrist. And when you make your pitch happen, as you pull against the ball, those are the fingers pulling against the ball. The wrist is creating the force that allows you to additionally pull and change your wrist position to pull against the ball. The forearm itself, which rotates, is working to either rotate your pitch type or it's working to not rotate. In other words, the good fastball is the one you're behind the ball on. If you rotate it a little, you start missing to the left side or the right side, depending on your arm dominance. So the forearm is responsible for one, either stabilizing rotation so you don't rotate when you don't want to, or rotating just the right amount, like if you're throwing a curveball. So the forearm is stabilizing the wrist so the wrist and fingers can do what they do for your different pitch types. The forearm also has that rotational and it has a capacity to work around the elbow. And it is the responsibility of these muscles to stabilize the elbow joint. So if you have a weak forearm, and especially for you guys that can't control your pitches, that's telling me that when I have a guy that's consistently lacking in control over his pitches, I send him home with wrist exercises. Because once they're strong, you know how to send a message. So in addition to building the muscles, you're learning how to think about it and think about controlling your pitch. But the ones that have the lack of control probably need the most training. And this is a very cool tool and weapon that you have to become a better pitcher. You can become a better pitcher by what you do in the gym, not just what you do on the mound. So the muscles around the forearm, they have a number of different roles. That's why they need to be developed. So you've got to go from your fingertips through your hand into your wrist, from your wrist up into your forearm. And the forearm needs to be worked not just with rotation, but it needs to be worked in a very stabilized way. So here's what I want everyone to do. I'm going to give you a list. You can go ahead and stop the podcast and you can get a pencil. You can listen to this, try to remember it. You can email me if you need it, anything you need regarding this, but I want everybody to get out and do this program. Now, my guys laugh because I give all my workouts a name. Sometimes we have a back attack. Sometimes we have gangster bicep workouts. This one's called the big, bigger, and biggerest workout. If you don't look at your forearms at the end of the month and say big, bigger, and biggerest, you did not do the workout. So I want everyone to get on this trail for the next month and get this workout done. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to do what I call ball flips. I want you to take a four-seam grip in your dominant hand, or just take the ball into your hand and put your hands in front of you as if you're going to toss a ball from your right hand into your left hand. And I want you to do that with your middle finger only. So your middle finger of your pitching hand is taking the ball and it's throwing the ball into your left hand. So you're holding both hands in front of you and you have them maybe a foot apart, and then you separate them, go 18 inches, 2 feet, back and forth, giving that middle finger a workout. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to take a baseball. I want you to stand up with your arm out in front of you. I want you to put if you're a right-handed pitcher, put your left hand under your right arm, which is out in front. You've got a four-seam grip. You've got all your grips you're going to use. And you're just going to, with the wrist and the elbow, throw the ball. So these are called wrist flips, and the ball is actually just moving into a fence or into someone who's catching it. You're 10 feet away, and all you're doing is working the fingers and the wrist of your pitching arm. Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah, actually, I used to do wrist flips for catching. Yep.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, exactly. You're just isolating with your arm out in front. The next thing that I want everyone to do is you're moving up the hand now. I want you to do wrist flexions and extensions in the gym. And that's where you get on your knees. You get a low pulley. You put a straight bar, something you use for triceps, on the low pulley. You're bent, you're kneeling with your forearms resting on a bench. The pulley bar, the attachment is in your hands like you're going to do a curl, and you're just going to do wrist flexions. And then when you're done with those, you turn them over and you do wrist extensions. When you do the flexions, as you return down into the stretch position, that bar needs to roll all the way to your fingertips. Don't let it roll off. And then you bring it back up. So you're not keeping your palm closed. You're letting the palm open up, let the bar roll down, and you come up. These are common exercises. Anybody who trains knows what a wrist flexion extension is with a cable bar. You can go into any gym and ask someone. And of course, it's in my book. And of course, you can also write me if you need further instructions. I want everyone to grab an easy curl bar next, and I want you to do reverse curls. This is the exercise that not only targets a major muscle in the upper arm, the only one that works when your palm is facing down, and it flexes the elbow, but it works the forearm muscle in its stabilizing way because your palm is down. You're doing a reverse curl with a pronated grip. You're on the part of the easy curl bar that angles downward. So now your hands are at least shoulder, if not wider apart. And you're doing what would look like regular curls, except that your palm is down. Now, any of the exercises I'm mentioning, other than the two that are baseball related, wrist flexion and extension, a reverse curl, you can probably Google them. And because these are common bodybuilding exercises, they're not something I made up. They're just traditional movements because in the world of bodybuilding and in the gym, every exercise is designed to work every joint. And this is the way you work that joint. The next exercise I want everyone to do is a hammer curl. There's actually a picture of it on my Facebook page. Hammer curls work the muscle that's on the outside of the arm. It's the most dominant muscle in a fastball, but it attaches on the upper arm and goes into the forearm, and it's on the outside. So its strength is primarily for stabilization. So it stabilizes the inside of the elbow where all the finger muscles and all the wrist muscles attach. So doing hammer curls is critical for a pitcher. And then the last thing that is really important is to do pronation and supination. And, you can take a straight bar in the gym, a straight bar attachment. It's the attachment you probably used for the flexion and extension. You take that bar and you grab it in the middle and you just twirl it back and forth to where your hand is supinating and pronating. It would be like if you took a baseball bat and you put your hand in the middle and you let it rotate up and down like it looked like um, Joe, what would you say? Like a helicopter sort of thing twirling around. So it's going up and down, up and down. You're actually just turning the wrist back and forth so the palm is changing its position. And so you've got something that's spinning, going back and forth. That's pronation and supination. Again, you can Google those terms. You can Google pronation, supination exercise. And by holding something in the middle, and we use a push down bar for that, you can go ahead and get the forearms going in the rotational capacity. So the forearms need rotation, they need stabilization with the palm down, the wrists need flexion and extension. Your fingers need to work, work, work. And of course, one of my favorite things for the fingers, in addition to working them directly with the ball, is to actually use the rice bucket and just put the rice into a bucket. Of course, it's uncooked, and put your hand inside and start.
We do have to go. We have to tell people that don't cook the rice.
We do have to tell. Oh yes, we do have to tell people that. And you put your hand down into the bucket, and you start. Guys, you know which fingers you use on the ball, your index finger and the middle finger, and you start just pawing in the rice as if you're trying to make different fists of rice, and turn your hand and start going to it with just getting those fingers to work so that you're actually using the muscle specifically. If you're in that rice bucket for like 60 seconds doing something, when you pull your hand out, it's tired. I mean, the guys are amazed at how these things feel on their hand. So, for bigger, and biggerest forearms, this is the workout. And I suggest that everyone, I don't care what age you are, it's not the movement, it's the weight you use. If you're young, just do the movements. If you're older, get to it, and your forearm can take it, and you will start to notice a huge difference. And don't get them sore for pitching. Make sure that you do them. Most of my guys do these kind of exercises at least twice a week, but they do them right after they pitch, or they do them 2 days before they pitch. They never do them when, like the night before, where they could get tired. The other thing is, learn how certain exercises affect you, because I've got guys that love to do wrist flexion and extension the night before they pitch, because they do it to not get sore. They do it to connect to it, because the guys that have been training with me know that training does two things. One, it builds you, but it also gives you a feel for muscles, and it gives you a connection. And when you get out on the field and you're doing, like, let's say you're doing those wrist exercises where you're just doing the grip and you're just letting the wrist go, flipping the ball, when you know what you're doing and what you're working on, it's a whole different awareness. And whenever you have more awareness to something, you're better at doing it. So those are my exercise recommendations for forearms. And I want August to be forearm month. And for all you baseball coaches out there, if there's a way that you can incorporate some of this stuff as a team, please do it. And if you need any ideas, I'm open. Just contact me. I'll help you. You can tell me what the situation is, and I will give you ideas. Do not let the pitchers pitch unless they're starting to train and get strong in the wrist and fingers and the forearm. I know this is going to help, and I think it's what we have to do. And I want pitchers to stand up and train like athletes, and I think that's what has to happen.
Well, Angel, I really like this list of exercises. I remember a lot of them doing them myself when I was playing college, and I wanted to get big forearms. Wanted to do it for hitting, and we do a lot of exercises to make our forearms strong for hitting for fast hands, and it's interesting. It's almost the same exact list of exercises that we used to do.
That's awesome.
I'm not sure that vigorist is a word, but we'll go with it.
It's a word now.
Yeah, you could trademark it, right?
No, I've heard it. I've heard it out other people's mouths.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
Okay, right.
when you're in the gym, you hear all kinds of things and ESTs on the end.
All right.
Big, bigger, and biggerest, right?
Vigorous, yeah. Okay, well, I have a question though. If a pitcher is out of season and he's not pitching in games anymore, and maybe he's not even in his throwing program, could you do these exercises every single day if you wanted to, or is it better to no?
Yeah, no, if you're training correctly, especially in off season, your muscles do need to recover. Even if they don't feel sore, they've got to recover. And normally we mix these in on days when they're doing biceps or triceps. And so, for pitchers that don't train at all, they've got to get in the gym and start doing these. And they have to do them at least twice a week. And you've got to do them to make sure you're not doing them the day before you pitch where they affect you. Okay, so that's the rule for them. For the guys who already train, add this in when you're doing your triceps. If you're pitching, you're not doing your biceps, probably. So these exercises are fine for you. You add them in on your tricep day, and or add them in on a focus day. I think that to get started, going in the gym and doing just these for anybody, whether you train or not, and just see how does this affect my arm. And of course, you're doing both arms, except for the wrist, the baseball work for the finger flips and then the wrist flips. You should do, of course, both arms. And I say that because I can't tell you how many pitchers ask me if they should do both arms. I'm like, yes, you do both arms. So,
Okay, why do you do both arms?
well, why? Because other than the baseball specific movements, the ones where you're holding a ball, you're still working on your body and you're going to get bigger. Remember, you're going to get big, bigger, and biggerest. You don't want to have one big forearm. You always build weight training's always done on both sides. Unless you're doing some specific thing for an injury, then you have to do it 5 times a day and you only do the one side or something. You're using a band. But no, when you're lifting weights, you always do both sides.
Okay. And for those who are old enough to remember the rice bucket, Steve Carlton was a great left-handed pitcher back in the day in the 60s and 70s and a little bit into the 80s. And I remember when he used to be done with his pitching, done with his game, and at the end of the game, instead of putting ice on his arm, he would put his arm in this big bucket of rice. And the sports writers just didn't know. They thought he was a freak. They thought he was very strange. And he explained this was what he learned in the Far East working. I guess he met some people in Japan or somewhere, and they were like, "Oh, you need to do this." And so, they thought he was a whack job because he was putting his arm in rice instead of ice. But
Yes.
guess what? As it turns out, he knew what he was doing.
He actually did. And a lot of my pitchers that were in high school, they would come in to train with me after pitching to restore their body. And they loved doing, since their arm was already used, they loved doing the wrist work and the forearm work on that pitching day at the end because they knew how to modulate the weight, but also they could get them done and get them recovering as they were allowing their body to rest for the next few days. So that's another way to do it too. So,
All right, that's great. So, Angel, I honestly think that we've already given the listener everything that we can give them today, but I have a feeling that you still want to close it out. You still want the ball. You want to come out of the bullpen and throw that ninth inning. So tell me what you have to close it out here in the ninth.
okay. I will, and I'll keep it really short. But in the last 2 weeks, I've had pitchers come to me and they were talking to me about their velocity, and the topic came up. There were coaches that were putting the gun on them in a bullpen, and then they were going to the pitcher and saying he's not performing and blah, blah, blah.
Hold on, Angel. When you say that they're putting a gun to their head, I mean, you're talking about a radar gun, right? Not a pistol?
Yes, and I don't think I said gun to the head. Yes, I'm talking about a gun, yes, although that is what it feels like probably to the pitcher when he's in his
Sure does.
bullpen, which is supposed to be sort of a safe haven for learning. But it's come to light in the last few weeks, and I don't want to tell you. I mean, and some of this is done in college and summer ball leagues, etc. But pitchers calling me and they're very upset about their velocity, and then we start to talk, and then I find out that one, they were using sometimes not a piece of equipment that probably was official, but two, they were taking their velocity when they were in a bullpen. And then they were using that data to tell them they're not doing well or they need to do better. And these are guys who are power. The three guys I'm thinking of that talk to me about this are all power pitchers. They all throw in the 90s, and they were only in the mid to upper 80s in the bullpen. So I had to explain to them what I'm going to say. And I know most of you have been listening to me already know this, so I'll keep it short. Guys, you do not, all that chemistry and adrenaline that I was talking about earlier, you do not have the chemical makeup in a bullpen that you have in a game. The chemistry is what gives the extra oomph to a pitcher. And so you are not going to have, number one, you're not going to have the chemistry. So you're going to have diminished velocity because of that. But two, you're not going to let yourself have that chemistry because that is not something you normally would visit in a bullpen. Now, yes, bullpens are places to work on being intense, but intensity given the environment, not the kind of intensity you're going to get in a game. Even though you may say, okay, let's say you're working in a bullpen, you're saying, yes, I'm going to try to find my highest gear here. It will be the highest gear for that day. It will not be the highest gear for that pitcher because his highest gear will not come out in a bullpen. It has to be environmentally stimulated. So coaches, please know this. And, in my opinion, I have people that'll say, can you put a gun on me? And I say, absolutely not. Because I know that the pitcher, if he sees 89 and I go, oh, okay, cool. You're throwing 89 in a pen. Well, guess what that means? You're probably 92 or 93 in a game. What number do you think he goes home with in his head and has nightmares about? The 89. He doesn't want to see those numbers. And sometimes the pitcher himself thinks it's a good idea. Hey, put a gun on me. I'm dying to see. But they end up being disappointed because it's impossible. And if you have a guy that's throwing as hard in the bullpen as he is in a game, well, he's under-regulating or over-regulating his chemistry on the mound because he should definitely have a difference. There's no way you have the same adrenaline. And so he's either asleep at the wheel on the mound or trying to calm himself down too much, or he's nervous, or he doesn't perform as well. But there's something wrong with that picture. So that would be, if you are doing it, that would be something that is not a correct data. But guys, please think about this. Let the pitcher have sleep at night and not have nightmares about velocity that he thinks is going down just because it's being measured in a bullpen. And I know for you coaches and scouts, sometimes you have to go see someone and they're doing a bullpen. And I know that you know how to add the miles per hour to what you're seeing, because I know that scouts know, okay, he just registered a 90, so I know he's going to be higher. But it's very hard on the pitchers when they get that kind of reading. So the scouts are keeping that in mind. But, as often as possible, we want to try to avoid that situation.
Yeah, that's good advice, Angel. And you opened this by saying that the bullpen is supposed to be a safe haven, and I don't know that every coach out there treats it that way. Working at my real job, we do something every once in a while called a brainstorming session. It's a similar kind of thing where we all come into a room and no one is allowed to say no, or no, that's a bad idea, or whatever. It's supposed to be a very free and open thing where we try to learn from each other and we try to come up with new ideas and things. And when someone says, oh, no, I don't like that idea, it's like, all right, well, this is a brainstorming session. So if you can't understand that, you can't participate. And I always feel like the bullpen are similar in that way where, you're learning, and there shouldn't be judgments. It should be there's going to be some kind of a feedback maybe when you're learning. But yeah, something like a radar gun.
Yeah.
I might like to use a radar gun in a bullpen session to get an idea of how to like learn how to throw the changeup, because we always want the changeup to be between maybe 8 and 15 miles an hour slower than your fastball. And, if you can't figure out that it's that much slower, maybe in that situation you could use a radar gun just to see what the difference is, but don't get hung up on how fast that fastball is. Just worry about what the difference is between the two pitches. And that's,
Well, I have something to say about that. That to me, if you've got a catcher that cannot tell the pitcher that his changeup was slow enough, you need a new catcher. That is the best radar gun. The catchers who I have the greatest respect for. We're always talking about, what's happening with the ball, but we don't have a quantitative thing on it. We have a qualitative thing. Was the changeup slow enough? The catcher will go, because I've dealt with this in this last week twice. No, it's a little too fast. So then we look at the grip, we talk about it. Perfect. That's perfect. The catcher knows. So I don't even agree. I think you don't use measurements that are quantitative in a bullpen, unless there's some purpose or something that's structured and that's all you're doing. But to just to try to improve something, because it's, let me say it this way, it's an inaccurate tool for any type of measurement that you're doing in a bullpen, because the environment is different. Therefore, the insides are different. So you're better off with qualitative analysis, judging it. And you coaches know, you can tell, hey, that changeup looks better, and you can hear it in the glove, and also you can ask the catcher. But that would be my feedback on that. It becomes inaccurate. So I'm not sure that it's worth the stress.
that's a fair reply. And I'm speaking for all the coaches who know what I'm about to say and have been in the same situation. Finding a new catcher is usually the most difficult thing in the world to do. Tell me about it. We're lucky to have a catcher, much less, a catcher who can do everything you want the catcher to do.
I hear you on that one.
In the real world.
No, I have the same issue. Catchers are, yes, I know. Anyways, in my next life, I will be developing and working with catchers. So,
anyway. That would be awesome. And we will do a podcast for that, because I'm all over that.
Great. Okay, Joe. Well, thank you for everything today.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Angel. This was just absolutely fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to episode 8, season 5 of Baseball Pitching the Fix. And, we covered a lot. I'm going to put a lot of this stuff into the show notes. Even though Angel gave away the horse here, I think that you should still go and get her book. I'll have links in the show notes. Engineering and Pitching Elbow. Great show. Thank you so much. Once again, we'll be back in about 2 weeks. In the meantime, we wish you safe and effective performance on the pitching mound.